Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields Bourbon podcast. I'm Jack, joined as always by our co-host Elijah. We are coming to you from the historic Strayer House in beautiful Newmarket, Virginia. The Strayer House is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, the official sponsor of the Battlefields Bourbon podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, the managing body of the National Historic District. This episode is also sponsored by History Fix. If you want to bring fascinating historical events, civilization, and figures right into your living room, check out History Fix. You can join them for documentaries, short films, and how-to videos. Historic eras currently range from the 1st to 21st century. Their team of curators can bring comprehensive and authentic historical content and make it available to you all. Battlefields and Bourbon podcast fans can receive a 20% discount off their first year subscription if you sign up at www.historyfix.com and use promo code Battlefield. That's BATTLEFIELDS, or no S, just Battlefield. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial after signing up. Download History Fix app and also the other streaming apps to watch the shows right away. Escape into history with History Fix. We have a very special guest on a very special episode, Mr. William Eichler. Will, thanks for joining us this day for this episode.
Oh, congratulations, fellas. It's been fun to listen to the podcast grow and continue, and it's a thrill to be here with you guys.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on. Thank you for providing us guidance over the past year with this podcast and giving us, advice and constructive criticism. It's been great to implement some of that into what we do, and we're truly grateful to finally have you on as a guest. So thanks for coming on. But before we go any further and get into our topic that you're going to help us, help guide us through today, our glasses are empty, so let's get them filled. Elijah, if you want to introduce us to our whiskey this evening.
So we actually have a rye whiskey today. This is Clyde May's 5-year single barrel. This was selected by ABC, Virginia ABC, and this is a 104 proof. Man, that was a good one too.
Nice. Smoke coming out of there.
104 proof expression. As far as a mash bill goes for this rye, I do not have one. I cannot find one. I would guess that it is a sourced whiskey from what I'm able to gather. It's a Conica Ridge Distillery down in Alabama. Still a newer distillery, so they're still in the process of making their own distillate and aging that distillate. So this one is coming from elsewhere. People think it's MGP, so it could be anywhere from a 95.5 rye to something a little lower in the 50 to 60% range. But we can definitely probably pick that apart once we nose it and taste it.
Sure.
So let's give it a nosing.
Got a little spice to it.
Mm-hmm.
That might be a 95, I'd say.
Very sweet.
Yeah. Well, let me, rather than being the guest, play the part of the interviewer for a second, because I'm a storyteller, not a whiskey guy. You used a phrase here. You said this is sourced. What's that mean?
So this would mean that most up-and-coming distilleries, newer brands, they will actually get their product from a place that's called MGP or other companies that distill for these new brands, and they give them product to put out for their customers while they're waiting on their own stuff to age. So this is like a kind of a jump start for the newer brands.
Great.
So they can just get distillate, age it, good to go.
So they get the distillate, but they still do the aging in whatever their rick houses are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I think you can get some aged stuff that's not, I don't want to say common, but it's not uncommon. It just depends on the brand, how new they are, what they've got as far as a setup for their distillery grounds, what they can handle. But I mean, this stuff, Clyde May's, the bourbon has been around for a little while, and I know we had their bourbon on another episode, and that was the history on that gentleman, Clyde May himself, World War II veteran. So super cool to be able to support that. But the bourbon's been around for a while. I think the rye is a little bit of a newer thing for them, so that's probably why that's sourced, and they're just recently getting their actual distillery up and running here within the past few months, I believe.
Well, this one's worth having again, and I think I'll be picking up a bottle before I head back north.
Yeah, you can find this in most ABC stores here in Virginia. I feel like it's, I've seen it on the shelf many a times. This specific bottle was, I guess bottled specifically for ABC. What's this fancy tag we have on the bottle here, Elijah?
So Virginia ABC will periodically do barrel picks. And what that is they just select single barrels of whiskey from different distilleries, and then they just make those available across the state to their customers. So this is a single barrel, not a small batch. So this is going to have its own unique flavor profile for that barrel. I definitely get a lot of sour apple off of that one, which is interesting. One that you commonly taste with ryes, but that one is always one that I like to pick up on a rye whiskey. But aged 5 years, 104 proof, produced or bottled by Clyde Mays Distillery, not necessarily distilled by them, but still a great product nonetheless.
Yeah, no, I think it's very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Will, I don't know how often you kind of, review whiskeys or bourbons, but what are your thoughts with, this one? Obviously, you said you'll have to pick up a bottle, but I guess if I can ask, what kind of notes or things are you getting?
I don't pick up the sour apple, but then I don't spend a lot of time tasting. I mean, I tend to like my ryes tasting like rye, and my whiskeys tasting like whiskeys, and my scotch not being too peaty for me personally.
Fair enough.
But I do pick up the sweet in here, and I really like that, and that layered with the spice is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I definitely like that as well.
I think it's what we'd say 104 proof, so
104.
It doesn't feel like a 104, but
it is very mellow. For what it is,
very light. And I love their bottle with this one because it's not like their old bottle with their regular bourbons. It's got this great green label to it and very tall. It catches the eye. It caught my eye when I saw it in the liquor store. My lovely fiance got this for me as a birthday gift, so it must have caught her eye as well. And it's a great pour, great sip. And
does she drink whiskey?
She does not. She just supports this habit. So. I think she wants to, but we'll find out.
One day.
One day.
With the sweet here and with not too harsh of a bite, this may not be a terrible place to start.
This might not be.
At least in the ryes.
Exactly. I'm a rye guy, so this is exciting.
Should be a rye girl.
Maybe a rye gal. Well, Will, with that being said, we've got a great, pour in our glass, and we'll have to move on to our topic now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about specifically what we'll be discussing this episode and maybe why this is of interest to you?
Well, as this drops, we're really close to the 160th anniversary of 3rd Winchester, just a little bit before. And for me, I've been looking for years at stories. My full-time job is in the motion picture industry. I work as a director of photography on network television shows. And my love of history with almost 35 years of Civil War reenacting, they've combined. I run a web series, Civil War Digital Digest, and we've done several short films. We're looking at ways to do longer films and to tell stories. You can do documentaries, and I love them. I'll work on them when I can. But it becomes a way of how do we connect people to history? 2 of the top 5 grossing movies all time are still historic pieces, Titanic and Gone with the Wind. There's a place for a documentary to teach a real story. There's a place for a movie to take people and transport them. And for about 5 years, I've been looking at a way to get a movie made. And I don't think it'll be a movie. We're still working on what it's going to be. But when you look at the TV series Turn from a few years ago about a spy ring, it's very loosely based on something in the Revolutionary War, but you look at it, it gets so fictitious and so off the rails. Mm-hmm. And I was down here for a film festival called Genre Blast, and we were showing it during 2020, during COVID. And my friend came down with me, who was my dolly grip when I was an operator on Chicago PD. He's a big Civil War buff as well as a horror filmmaker, and we're looking around. And as we're traveling, watching the film festival, we're going into Winchester, and we come into a parking structure. Walk out of the parking structure, and there's a plaque there. And it's talking about our subject today, Miss Rebecca Wright and Thomas Laws. And get looking at it, the entire foundation, not the entire foundation, but a strong part of the foundation on a military intelligence level that launches the entire Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864 is brought to you courtesy of a pacifist, unionist, Quaker, mid-20s young lady and an enslaved man.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's right there. You've this goes back. We set the story, and Rebecca and Wright and Thomas Laws come into it a little bit later. We need to set the stage here in the Shenandoah Valley. It's late July '64. if I've got my dates right, it's second Kernstown. Am I late? So General Crook is defeated and pushed out. That will push him out of Winchester. Again, we talk about Winchester being most traded. You can debate the number of times. The bottom line, it is the most exchanged city in the American Civil War. Well, he's beaten, he's pushed back. Not only is he pushed out, he loses his independent command. Because about this time, Sherman is stymied around Atlanta. Grant is stymied at Petersburg. He's trying to figure out what can happen. Sheridan has had good luck. He's killed Jeb Stuart. The Cavalry Corps is working, and Grant says, take the Cavalry Corps. I'm giving you more men. We're going to build an army for you that's not just your Cavalry Corps. Attack the Shenandoah. Sheridan gets here, and all vim and vigor, all fire we know about Sheridan, he's actually trying to figure out what to do. And he's doing good intelligence because he doesn't know, and he's acting cautiously here. What are you going to do? Well, when he comes here, he takes over several armies. One of them is Crook's army. Crook and Sheridan are West Point classmates. They're also West Point roommates.
Good friends.
They're good friends. And at this point, and there is a point in their life when they leave being good friends, but it's after this. At this point, they definitely are good friends. Yeah. So Crook the chagrined comes back and has to give up command, but it's somewhat tempered because it's his old friend.
Yeah, I think it's good that you mentioned that, because a lot of folks that are understanding stories like the one you're talking about, or just battles in general involved with the 64 Valley Campaign, they like to take the post-war idea that Sheridan and Crook are not good friends, that, like you said, arises after the war, and try to use that perspective when understanding their decisions and their dynamic during the Valley Campaign, during the war. And like you're saying, that's just not the case. They're still good friends at this point.
It's time and place.
Yeah.
And Crook is also good friends with one of his brigade commanders, Rutherford B. Hayes. Yeah. We know where he'll go on to, but he's a part of the story. So Sheridan's trying to figure out what to do. He's got independent scouts. I forget the major's name who runs them, but they do sometimes act in civilian clothing. So, okay, Sheridan in his memoirs, they're scouts. Let's just be honest. We could also call them spies. Yeah. The victors generally get to write the results.
This is true.
Yeah.
But they come out, they develop this man who they call shrewd and loyal, and that's Thomas Laws. He's buried over in Berryville. Rarely does a time pass when I come to the Shenandoah Valley that I don't stop and visit Thomas. I work with the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation to produce the annual series Fridays at the Front, which is the video version of the Fridays at the Front, which you all take care of on the field.
Yep.
And one of those was about Thomas Laws. And his family's buried there. He's buried there. He goes to Berryville after the war. But in the 1860 census, we don't find him, which most likely means he's enslaved. When first we started doing research for the story, we had thought that he was a free man of color. Now I don't think that's the case. No matter what, he has a permit from Confederates to go through the line several times a week to sell vegetables in the city. Again, the city is relatively besieged. It doesn't matter by which. It's either mobbed by Confederate soldiers trying to eat, or it's got federal soldiers who don't like a good portion of the populace. And so here's a way to get food and to get fresh vegetables in. The scouts realize what they have, and they take him to Sheridan. And Sheridan is also talking with Crook, both old friends. Yeah. And again, he's looking for intelligence. Who was the last commanding officer in Winchester? It's Crook. And Crook says, if there's somebody who will help you, I think I know. It's a young Quaker lady by the name of Rebecca Wright. She's a school teacher. Well, when you look at the stories of the Civil War, brother versus brother, we talk about the 1st Maryland versus the 1st Maryland. We talk about the brothers from Maryland, who one captured the other here in the valley, and then the next morning, the one from the opposite side was let go quietly, and no repercussions on the other brother. We have this mythos and this ethos of that as part of our American understanding of what the Civil War is. And then let's flip the gender coin. Rebecca's young sister Hannah is a stark raving Confederate. So Crook, probably unwittingly, says, hey, Go talk to this lady, not realizing that she's been hiding all the time. She teaches school, and at the beginning of the war, she has to go from working in one of the main schools to teaching in her own home, teaching other loyalist families' kids, because she's been run out, she's been ostracized, is sort of frozen in place.
And that's something to note, too, is that Winchester at the time, the population of Winchester is incredibly secessionist. So she being a Unionist is very much so in the minority.
Absolutely, but she's not there by herself. So when we look at the book Winchester Divided, Julia Chase, one of the main authors of that book, as far as the two original journals that we follow, she's the Unionist. She and Rebecca are friends. So when you look at Civil War Winchester, she pops up in here. So the city is divided. It is definitely heavily Confederate, but it is a majority. It is not like 90-10, I don't think. I get the feeling that it's not quite. It's definitely heavy super majority, but I don't think it's quite that far.
Yeah.
So Sheridan talks to Crook and says, who can I get to? Okay, I need to talk to this lady. How can I talk to her? The scouts come in. They say, we've developed this man who is loyal and shrewd. Sheridan wants to talk to him. They spring Thomas Laws from wherever he's at and bring them to Sheridan's headquarters. And the Taylor sketches, one of the great sketches, is of Sheridan and Thomas Laws sitting by the fire at night talking, as Sheridan's trying to talk him into the next time he goes into Winchester to take a message. Do you know Rebecca Wright? There's some discussion in the historic record. Did they know? One account says, oh, yes, I know her. And another account says she was panicked when this man came. So there is some gray there. Still, the gray of, not the gray of Confederacy gray, but the gray of time and the gray of multiple accounts. We don't know how well they know each other. But at the end of the day, Thomas agrees to go and take a message from Sheridan through the Confederate lines to Rebecca. So, and the plan they devise, because Sheridan realizes what will happen if he gets searched and how good of a chance there is that he could be searched. Okay, so what do? They're going to write the message on tissue paper, and that'll be wadded up in a 19th century version of tinfoil, and Thomas is to carry that in his mouth. If he passes through, no problem. If he gets searched, all he has to do is swallow it.
Wow.
It's a good way to do it, though.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, we're talking about dead drops and spy stuff in today's movies. What did we just do here?
Right.
Yeah, and I've always heard, when I've heard this account of the capsule of tinfoil, I've also heard like gel capsule, which I don't know how that would have worked. But the idea of swallowing this note, I mean, I'm sure this note couldn't have been this small. So then to roll this up on a piece of paper with tinfoil wrapped around it, keeping that in your mouth.
And your mouth's probably going to be pretty dry when you're panicked, but it's do that or get either hung or sliced open by Confederates who don't like you because you're enslaved.
Yeah.
So anyway, the account through Sheridan's memoirs, he says that he wrote a message to her, and the message that went on that paper said, I learned from Major General Crook that you are a loyal lady and still love the old flag. Can you inform me of the position of Early and his forces, the number of divisions in his army, and the strength of any or all of them, and the probable or reported intentions? Have any more troops arrived from Richmond, or are more coming or reported to be coming? And then in classic 19th century style, I am respectfully your most obedient servant, P.H. Sheridan, Major General Commanding.
Very straight to the point.
Yes.
Did not beat around the bush and asking.
But I mean, we could almost go to Hamilton for that ending. The musical Hamilton, that is. So, but Thomas agrees to it, and he does, and he goes in, and he makes the delivery to Rebecca. Some stories say they know each other. Some, again, one story says he was darting around the house, shutting the windows, and she's panicking, trying to figure out what this African-American gentleman is doing in her school, shutting the windows on her. At the end of the day, he delivers the message and goes away to give her time to deliberate. She talks to her mother, who is also a Unionist, and decides in the end it's in best interest to go ahead and share what she knows.
God, I just, for a moment there, trying to process the fact that, you know, he's risking almost everything to you know, bring this message to the person that it's intended for and then bring this information back.
And it's not just him.
And then
I believe he's married and has multiple children.
Yeah.
There is jeopardy for his entire family.
And especially if they're not freed people at the time, what happens, there's just all those thoughts that go through your head. And then going to Rebecca Wright, her thought process, she's, probably at this point in the war, not the most liked person in the town of Winchester.
Definitely not.
Yeah, she's got, and it's not going to help as time goes on, she's got this sister, like you said, that's pro-Confederate, and I've heard accounts of her flirting with Confederates in the house, and then her, there's this time where, and I think this is what makes this such a great story, and a true story.
Let's add layers to it. Her father is very ill. Her father has been thrown in jail by Confederates earlier, I believe in 62 or 63. He's very infirm from some of that and from other things. You've got an ill father. You've got a mother you're trying to talk to. You've got a sister you're trying to avoid. And 2 days earlier, you were asked to sit with a Confederate officer who's convalescing next door and happens to spill the beans of what's going on in the Army. Probably just talking shop with somebody to talk. She didn't know she was looking for information. It's one of the things that, as we talk about turning this in what I do, trying to create narratives and movies that stay as close to the history, taking a historic story and creating the program, whether it's a movie, whether it's a short film, whether it's a limited series. One of the challenges is taking the history and turning it into narrative arcs. Well, Rebecca Wright is your main character. The Confederate officer tells her something. Thomas shows up. She does have to make a choice to send the information back, but everything else falls in her lap. She's very difficult to make the heroine because she doesn't take actions. We don't take her journey with her. She doesn't, other than this one thing which is internal, she doesn't have to make a decision.
Yeah, I mean...
and this is converting history to movie, is one of the challenges.
Because you could flip it and find a way to make Thomas Laws the main character of of this story in a way, too.
Okay, time for Jack to quit doing battlefield interpretation and start screenwriting.
Yeah, but...
You might have just picked where we're sort of barking at right now.
Well, going back to that moment where she needs time. Thomas Laws has to go away, go somewhere. Does he continue to his vegetable and fruit selling gig?
What else are you going to do?
I mean, but like trying to act normal when it's not normal, and then Rebecca in her home processing everything, this moment where you're only safe within your home, you feel like, and everything could collapse around you once you step outside and what you decide to say and what not to say. It's that moment right there where, for both of them, and specifically Rebecca, it's what do you do? And I think she has this influence, like you said, and you can continue from here, of her mother. Her mother ultimately tells her, it might be best to provide that information.
I don't know whether her mom tells her or whether her mom, like a lot of parents, will just sit and listen, let you come to your own decision. Yeah. My parents have done both for me in my life, and I'm sure yours have both done both for you. Yeah. So that's sort of lost to time, but through that conversation, Rebecca makes a decision. And she goes to the tissue paper. Matter of fact, while unwrapping the tinfoil, was quickly warned, hey, don't wreck that. You're going to need it if you respond. Yeah. So, resources are scarce. It's not like he's running to the kitchen, grabbed some tinfoil out of the cupboard. Things are in a different place, especially in a reduced Confederacy. But this is what she does. September 16th, 1864. I have no communication whatever with the rebels, but will tell you what I know. The division of General Kershaw and Cutshaw's artillery, 12 guns and men, General Anderson commanding, have been sent away, and no more are expected, as they cannot be spared from Richmond. I do not know how the troops are situated, but the force is much smaller than represented. I will take pleasure hereafter in learning all I can of their strength and position, and the bearer may call again. Very truly yours. So she does respond. She sends the message back to Sheridan, and this Confederate officer, no fault of his own, he didn't think there was going to be a spy ring run. Right. He's just talking with some girl from town. An injured officer, even if she's a unionist, you've been stuck in the military, a chance to talk with a lady for a little while and have a conversation, maybe showboat a little bit.
Yeah. Right.
As an officer, you think about where he's at and where she's at. Well, this is Friday, and this is the 16th, and the Battle of 3rd Winchester is
September 19th.
Is the 19th, is Monday.
Yeah.
There's time here. Now we get the pregnant pause. Now we get everybody waiting because when they get back, Sheridan just got a call from Grant, hey, come up to Charlestown, see me.
Yeah.
So Sheridan has this information, but the boss says, I want to talk to you. Back up he goes.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can set this whole meeting up and everything, but the paraphrase is he gets up there, goes, I have this. Grant looks him in the eyes and goes, what are you doing here? Go back and attack him. I mean, we can draw this all out, but that's really the course of everything. And on the 19th, the Battle of Third Winchester is launched. We know we have a strong fight in the morning. We know we have a strong Confederate offensive. We know we have federal counteroffensives. We have... I'm just going to say it this way. You can bleep me out later if you want to. We've got a president of the United States doing one of the most badass things we've ever seen the president of the United States doing in Hayes, leading his brigade across Red Bud's slower Red Bud Run.
Yeah.
You know, and then we have one of the few times that a few times in the Civil War that a classic Napoleonic cavalry charge breaks infantry.
Yeah.
This culminates the Confederates and Early streaming out of town, the Federals streaming in. And Rebecca Wright wrote that she couldn't see on the first floor, she couldn't see on the second floor, but she says from the garret, I could see. I think the garret probably is in the peak in the end because there's no true garret or cupola on the house if we take the drawing in Taylor's sketchbook to be true. So is it a fictional drawing? Is it a fictional? We don't know. But the third floor, she said she could see the old flag, and she fell to her knees praising God right there. And
wow.
So, you know, her faith has things carrying. And then there's a knock on the door in the evening, opened the door, and she said that she could hear the drag of 2 sabers. It's Union officers. General Sheridan writes the telegram to Grant of the victory on one of the desks in her schoolroom. And we have that in Taylor's sketchbook as well.
Wow.
Wow.
And then we're on our way down the rest of the Valley Campaign. But the launch of the Shenandoah Valley Campaign is brought to you by a pacifist Quaker woman and an enslaved man.
Wow. So what from here? I mean, is this the end of the story for Rebecca Wright and Thomas Laws, or?
Thomas goes a little distant. We don't have as much about him. We know where he passes, and having shot that episode, the Jessamine County Historical Society that runs the school museum next door also takes care of the cemetery. And to be very honest, as a good white boy coming into their cemetery, I got looked at twice. And one of the ladies, who I think is the vice president of the Historical Society, also works in the cemetery, and she was very cross about me being there with my business partner, Andy, but we talked more and more, and after spending about an hour and meeting every single one of her dead aunts and hearing some amazing stories out of her community and her family, she was perfectly pleased to have us tell Thomas's story.
That's good.
She didn't want Thomas taken advantage of. And to be very honest, neither do I. I have an immense amount of respect for what this man did as an intelligence asset for the United States of America.
Overall, this, it often gets overlooked, and specifically the Third Battle of Winchester. I've, grown up and finally, getting an understanding of how that battle plays out. Me as a kid, I always thought, man, that'd be such a cool battle to have a film about because of the Thomas Laws and Rebecca Wright story, because of the seesawing action, what it leads to, Grant's involvement, the effect that it has, the amount of casualties as a result.
A president being a flat-out hero, the redemption story of Crook who gets beat, who brings the good information, who subjugates himself in military order without being a sullen prick.
Yeah.
And goes ahead and serves and does. And I think some of the strain between Sheridan and Crook will start at Third Winchester, that launch of a counteroffensive. There is some debate back and forth already between the two of them. Who gave that order, or when was that order given? I think that starts to fracture the friendship a little bit. It'll get way worse on the plains later. Yeah. But I think we see a little bit of it here, very sadly.
And I guess, so what happens, you said Tom Laws kind of, fades into history in a way. And but what about Rebecca Wright?
She sure doesn't, because Sheridan writes about her in her memoirs. Shortly after the war, he secures her a job outside of town in the federal government because she is not liked here.
Yeah, so she's kicked out of Winchester practically.
I wouldn't say kicked. She's more run out of Winchester. So, and gets a job. I forget which federal branch. I could look it up. It's buried in here.
Yeah.
But, so it shows the real complexity of a civil war in a place. The Civil War, we can make it sanitized with pretty lines of blue and pretty lines of gray and stay far enough back to not see the blood. And with living history, I'm always very cautious about that becoming too much of that. But with this story, you start to see not the Confederate gray, but the moral and the lifetime gray of a sister who's a Confederate and a sister who's a Unionist and a neighbor who's a Unionist and a neighbor on the other side who's a Confederate who would house convalescent Confederate officers, and a school and a general who spoke nicely during the summer, introducing another general to the fact he could meet her, and then after the Battle of Third Winchester, knocking on the door and introducing them in person potentially.
And there's very real consequences for all of these choices. I mean, if she decided to just hang on to the information a little bit longer, would the Battle of Third Winchester have happened as it did? For it to be, I mean, she only had 3 days' time from when she receives the note to when Sheridan decides to move on the Confederate lines at Theopecan Creek.
And you talk about the serendipity of combat and the serendipity of history. To have this conversation because she's being polite to a convalescing Confederate officer who's probably a little bit of getting something off his chest, a little bit of talking shop, and probably a fair chunk of showboating.
Yeah.
And if you consider it, too, if the Confederates did win Third Winchester, and this is a big what if, they would come back to her knowing that somebody had spilled some sort of information somehow, or at least had a suspicion. And the consequences for her that route would have been
she'd already been watched, or if her sister heard something. There's so many what ifs that don't end well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about specifically the information Rebecca will receive from that Confederate that's there near her home days before, how often civilians had a finger on the pulse of military activity within their town, knowing the amount of troops, the actions that took place, losses, casualties, all those sorts of things. We often forget, you often think, they're not in the battle, they're not in the army, they don't know these numbers, but they do come into contact with these people. These people are hanging outside their homes, they're camping in their backyards, they're stealing fruits and vegetables. So they're around, they're hearing it, and it's just, I feel like it's a fact that often gets forgotten. And in this case, it was used for the benefit of the cause. So
of the Union Army, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, anything else? Any other questions, Will? Anything you want to add to this story?
No, other than just saying that I have hope, and we're in what's sometimes in television called development hell, but I really have a hope that we can give you a chance to see this story at some point in the future. Yeah, I mean, for folks listening, if you'd like to see this story come to life on some sort of screen and some sort of production, share this, email us, Civil War Digital Digest and Will. Let them know you're interested, and the large amount of interest can, push a movement forward and, make something and an idea reality. Mm-hmm. So, and I guess for folks who want to do something more and take a step, because what we talk about in Fridays at the Front, we talk about here, come to the Valley. The house is gone. Rebecca Wright's house is gone. It's a parking structure, but there's a marker there. Yep. The Hopewell Friends Association, her church, has moved closer, but that building is here. Sheridan's headquarters is here. You can see the Taylor Hotel on the walking mall in Winchester. You can go to the county courthouse, which is the main museum in Winchester for Civil War history that is hosted and run by the Battlefields Foundation here. You can walk out its back door and look at the beautiful Bell Mansion. There's so much from this time, from this exact story. The book Civil War Winchester that's here shows, her friend Julia Chase shows one of the churches in the area, an Episcopal Presbyterian church, and mentions this is Julia Chase's church. This is where she worshiped. You can make a connection by standing where these people stood. You can see where things are through the Battlefields Foundation, through the Third Winchester Museum, through some of the stuff in the Winchester Museum. You can see some of the Taylor sketches, and you can get a little bit closer to Rebecca and to Thomas. You can go to Berryville. You can visit Thomas's grave. Yeah. I mean, it's all around us, and what we talked about, like Will said, you can physically stand at some of these places where these events took place, which is
all a part of the importance of history. Is bringing it to life, understanding it, and appreciating it.
I was going to say appreciating and enjoying it, because it's there for us to remember. It's there for us not to repeat. But for those of us who find a passion and an escape to stories, when we go to history for a story, we know instantly that we're leaving where we are for a little bit, and that gets us a chance to escape. And what's storytelling other than giving people a chance to relax and get away for a little bit?
Yeah,
exactly.
And I hope that's what we've done today for folks.
Yeah. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, give it a like, share it with your friends, and 5 stars if you're feeling it. And if you want to find more of Will, check out Civil War Digital Digest on YouTube, and it's also on History Fix. Don't forget to use code Battlefield at History Fix for 20% off. And we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.